Episodes 3 and 4 of The Dynasty are now available on Apple TV+. They chronicle the journey of the Patriots from lovable underdogs to hated villains. With much of Episode 4 focused on Spygate. Those videotapes just obliterated to smithereens, we find out, by Robin Glazer, thanks to that little cameo from Robin Glazer there. Tom Curran, Michael Holley. Spygate is the focus for us, even though it's episodes 3 and 4 that we'll be going over tonight, and this was episode 4. But let's get right into it, Tom. Spygate now, almost 20 years later. How did you feel that was portrayed in the Dynasty? And how much legacy in New England do you think has been impacted by that now that we have so much time removed and based on what you thought at the time?
Here's what's interesting. You have number 3, which includes the win over the Rams, which includes the post snowball, everything that happened going on, and then 2 Super Bowls, and then into Spygate. So the two things are nicely married because the Patriots went from, as I called it at the time, before Spygate happened, they had gone from Cinderella to supermodel, and all that entails in being a supermodel and the amount of hate. So much happened in 03, 04, 05, 06 that primed the Patriots to be as loathed as they were. I thought Spygate was well treated because the coolest thing about Spygate and that season, Michael, was the absolute omnipotence, the wagon, the unstoppable force that were the New England Patriots. So as a New Englander and a sports fan and somebody who covered that team, I was as enthused as I was during the 10 episodes in reliving and saying, wow, those MFers were so friggin' good. I loved it. I loved it. And you're not supposed to be biased.
Right.
But I lost my objectivity at times during 07 where I'm like, 2 up to everybody. Look at this team.
Yeah. What was the quote from Rodney Harrison? F them all.
F them all.
F them all. And a lot of the players, took on Bill's burden. They took on Bill's grievance with Roger Goodell in the NFL, and that kind of fueled them the entire way. I thought they treated it well in this episode, Spygate, especially because it was like they had the 2 trains running there. There was the state cop who was the mayor of the Meadowlands. So when they opened, I'm like, what is this? What are they doing here? And there's a guy, he used to work undercover, and he couldn't do it because of the betrayal. Then he goes to the Meadowlands, and I never had any problems in my years there, except for the Spygate, he called it. So you had that, so it was overwrought, because you have a guy who used to be undercover kind of litigating or setting the tone for this, and I think that set the tone for the commentary that came after. I mean, sure, they cheated, but we talked about Spygate at the time like it was the undermining of the republic. Like society is no longer the same because the Patriots recorded opponents. And then, as Tom said, just the dominance of Randy Moss coming in and that offense being transformed.
I am interested in legacies here. What did you think Spygate would do to Bill Belichick's legacy at the time? And what do you think it's done to his legacy now as we sit here so many years later?
At the time, I thought it was going to be difficult for him to overcome, especially if they didn't win it. So in 2007, in real time, I said, okay, he'll be fine. They're the best team in football. They'll win. The tapes are destroyed, and everybody will know they just won it. But they lose to the Giants. And then in 08, Brady gets hurt. In 09, they lose to the Ravens. And then there's this little, they didn't win in 10. They didn't win in 11. Maybe that's going to be the thing. Bill Belichick, never won after Spygate. I thought that would happen. But the legacy, Tom, I think is just how raw it is for people, even to this day, and how Eric Mangini never got back into the family, and how Bill started to push people away after Spygate because he didn't know who to trust, and how Steelers fans and former Steelers players still believe that they were robbed of Super Bowls because of Spygate. I mean, there's still ripples from this 17 years later.
To me, again, there's a through line to all of this. And when the Patriots won in 01, 03, and 04, they were celebrated, but they also celebrated themselves. Some players did. Teddy Bruschi, I think, is significant in being one of the lone guys, and Rodney Harrison to a lesser degree, but Teddy especially, in celebrating the so-called Patriots way, which is something that Bill Belichick and Tom Brady don't espouse. Robert Kraft does. There is a Patriots way, which is an arrogant, from the outside, perspective to use for yourself. It basically said, we're smarter than you. We're going to beat you mentally. We're going to be more resilient. We're going to be tougher. We're going to use the rules to our advantage. We have team over individual. You people are all selfish. So we use that as media. We used it as a fan base, too, to look at the Colts. And we can still use it very easily and look at those teams and say, you guys weren't like the Patriots who were so selfless. But what does it leave to the legacy? Michael's point in the episode, Phil, I think was excellent when he said Bill started to change, and Scott Pioli gave voice to that as well. People changed because of the success. They wanted the narcotic and would do anything to make that happen. I'm sure that they were taping in Cleveland, they were taping in New York, they were taping all the way through. So I don't think that the Spygate stuff is an outgrowth of the Patriots found a new way to cheat. I think it's the tolerance for the Patriots was gone by the time 07 came. And everyone's like, yeah, we got them now.
How did the relationships change? Because they get to Mangini, right? The Mangini part of it is obvious. But it feels as though Spygate changed Belichick's relationships with others in the building. Maybe even Scott Pioli. It feels like Pioli at one point sort of references that but doesn't get into it.
Yeah, he said, those
you guys
of us,
were there.
Yeah, those of us who were close to Bill, he started to push us away. That was his quote, his reference.
And how did that manifest itself?
All right, well, I think we've seen it. Let me just fast forward to 2023 season. What do we see with Bill? What was the problem with Bill? Well, at the end with the Patriots, he had his sons on staff. He had friends of friends on staff. Why are you coaching wide receivers? Hey, you happen to be my buddy. My buddy's recommendation from Johns Hopkins. The circle got even closer. And even if you had a little bit of pushback, which Scott Pioli did at times. Now, not like Mangini. Mangini, before Spygate, would be one of those guys who say, Bill, you're wrong. And a lot of coaches weren't like that. And he accepted that. But I think he became less accepting of people who weren't on board with what his vision was. And you see the product with the New England Patriots right now. This is part of it. It really is connected. He used to be more solicitous and more collaborative. And I think after Spygate, he just became less trusting.
I also think there's a little bit of a ripple effect, Tom. When you look at it big picture, knowing what we know now, Spygate and how Roger Goodell handled that and how the rest of the league didn't love how Roger Goodell handled that. And maybe it looked as though the league treated the Patriots with kid gloves there. Years later, Deflategate happens. And the league is pissed at the Patriots, and they're not going to get away with this time, Roger. You're going to lay the hammer down on them this time, Roger. And Bill Belichick, with Spygate in his background, he has to put all of Deflategate on Tom Brady. That relationship starts to fracture.
Yep.
It's a massive domino in how the rest of the decade plays out for the Patriots when it comes to these big picture relationships. I didn't even mention Robert Kraft and Bill Belichick and how their relationship was impacted.
Yeah, and had Roger Goodell extracted the pound of flesh from the Patriots that was more significant in a suspension, and you'll hear Robert Kraft talking about, I did not want Bill suspended. And that was, I think, huge. A suspension of a head coach for a violation like that would have been a very difficult black mark to erase. I think that going undefeated that year largely said, tape, don't tape, we're going to beat your ass anyway. But I think that a suspension would have announced it was that bad. So they did protect him from that, but not taking that pound of flesh then meant you had to take 5 pounds of flesh later in a cutting off your nose to spite your face violation with the footballs. You had to spend, $25 million? You dominated the offseason. You suspended the greatest player in football history. I mean, it did great things for the attention devoted to the sport, but for the other 31 teams, they're like, here we go again with these idiots up there in New England. We're spending all our time on them.
You mentioned just how dominant the football team was in 2007. We're going to talk about that right now. I want to get to a quote from Rodney Harrison, which was phenomenal. Mike already referenced it here tonight. He said, our goal was to blow everybody out of the water. F them all. Huh. That's our mentality. That's our little thing. F them all. I found the aftermath and the reaction to, of course, how dominant they were is fun to watch. Some of the aftermath of the Super Bowl itself and just how hard that loss was on players, coaches. You had Jonathan Kraft talking about how players were crying and throwing up in the locker room, seemingly because they were that upset. What was it like being around the team in the aftermath of that loss, Tom?
It was jarring. It was mourning. It was, as a writer and as a sports fan, because everyone, goes away. You don't see those guys after the game necessarily. You see them it's as if everyone had just seen somebody die close to them. I mean, I remember actually during that week, I went to dinner with Belichick and Keyshawn Johnson and a couple of Bill's friends from Nantucket that he had grown up with. And, we all went out to dinner, and that wasn't happening all the time, Bears and Jarian. And he was very relaxed during the week. He was very relaxed. He looks at me and at one point said, "So what do you think the big story is this week?" I'm like, people wonder whether you're going to go undefeated, Bill. It's like,
right.
So it was really interesting to watch that unfold, and for Bill to say after the game, "We let you guys down." We did all see it coming to a degree. The narrow breadth of their wins. They were down by 10 against the Giants. They barely got past the Baltimore Ravens. They barely got past A.J. Feely and the Eagles. They were not dominant in the AFC Championship game. There was so much, but you never expected. The Giants were exactly in the Super Bowl like the 0-1 Patriots were against the Rams. They beat the hell out of the Patriots.
Even though it was a shock to see a team that was undefeated, that was 18-0, lose the game, Tom's right. By the time we got to the Super Bowl, the Giants and Patriots were even. They were even. The Patriots not only didn't play well in the AFC Championship game, Tom Brady threw 3 interceptions in a conference championship game that they won. So, and he got hurt in that game. And the Giants were a wild card, last team in, and just went on the road and were beating people. Remember the shot of Tom Coughlin in Green Bay with his face, just blistered. Like, Tom, put a ski mask on or something. This is terrible. Vaseline. just kind of load you up there or something. But it was so stunning, but everybody wanted to see it. I'll never forget, the last thing I'll say, I'll never forget leaving that stadium in Phoenix, and I could hear the chant, 18-1. Like we're not just Giants fans, football fans hated the Patriots and really wanted to see them win, and they were reveling in that loss.
We're going to get much more into these episodes 3 and 4. We've got a special guest coming up, fellas. Director of the Dynasty, Matt Hamachek, will be us to discuss both episodes. And we ask what it was like asking Bill Belichick about Spygate and where was Tom Brady on the matter. It's all coming up after these words. 3 and 4, the Dynasty are now available on Apple TV+. That right there from Randy Moss, among the fantastic interviews that the Dynasty crew are bringing to you. And leading the charge is director Matt Hamachek, who is kind enough to join us now. Matt, thanks so much for being with us. Who to you was the star of the Dynasty, at least through the first 4 episodes here? Because I think there are a couple of different candidates, Randy Moss included.
I think it is Randy. I mean, well, maybe Ty Law in the first couple. Teddy Bruschi is one of the greatest storytellers I've ever encountered. But look, when I remember we went down to North Carolina to interview Randy, and he shows up, he sits down in the chair, and I can't remember what the first question I asked him was, but the man just is electric. And for, that clip, I've probably watched every single episode of this thing 40, 50 times because we've been working on it. But every time I see that clip, every time I see him doing the Forrest Gump thing about the first catch that he gets, the first touchdown pass that he gets from Tom Brady, it never gets old for me, and it always puts a smile on my face.
Hey, Matt, Tom, when you were doing the interviews with different individuals having to discuss Spygate, obviously it's a touchy subject. How difficult was it to broach with Bill Belichick? And did you press him at all, the way that you did a great job of including Armin Gatayan's interview for 60 Minutes? Armin went at him good, but did you push Bill much?
On this one in particular, no, I didn't, because by the time I interviewed Bill, I knew that I had the Armin Gatayan interview. And I had seen Bill get asked about it enough to know that he was never going to go to the places that he had already gone in the Gatayan interview. And so once I had other things that were going to be difficult that I had to talk to Bill about. I had to ask him about the benching of Malcolm Butler. I had to ask him about things related to his relationship with Tom at the end. So there were so many other things that I wanted to really dive into. And so because I had the Catane interview and I knew that I was never going to get better than his response there, I let it go after the first question.
I was surprised that when you had Mike Martz, talking in episode 3, and Martz, I thought Martz was very entertaining, and he was animated, talking about how it pissed him off to see America rooting for the Patriots. I was surprised that he was silent on Spygate. Is that something that he didn't want to discuss, you didn't want to discuss with him? How did that work? Because I feel like a lot, Tom Brady and Martz, for that matter.
Tom was a different story. Tom, I felt like this was really Bill and Ernie's scandal in a lot of ways, right? I was going to talk to Tom about Deflategate, and I do, and you see that happen, and you hear what he has to say about it. But with Martz, he definitely did talk about it, and he discussed, obviously, not as much about Spygate, but more about what the newspapers call Spygate 2, which is the Boston Herald article that was eventually retracted. And look, there were early versions of some of these episodes where we got into that, and it just, with everything, you got 10 episodes into. A lot of people, they think, oh my gosh, 10 episodes about the Patriots, that just seems like a lot. But when you're actually in the middle of it, it's 10 is nowhere close to enough to include everything that's really interesting. And Martz was fascinating on the subject.
Is there any way that you guys would ever release the outtakes? I mean, you gotta.
That's a question for Apple. So you gotta reach out to them.
That's right. Get Apple on the line.
Get him on the horn.
Bring him in there.
We need him now.
Get him in here.
Well, you obviously have a lot of choices you have to make when you're putting this together. I wonder how you decided to cover the second 2 Super Bowls of the first part of the dynasty here, because it is remarkable how they go from lovable underdog to the evil empire in a very brief period of time, because there isn't that much time devoted to those second 2 titles. Second and third.
That was something that we came to over time. It took us a couple different iterations. We had started to cut scenes that involved things like Lawyer Malloy leaving and Rodney coming in, and the problem with it was a couple different things. One of the things I loved about that story in particular was it was an example of the team sort of fracturing and being at this really pivotal moment, not only because of how much everybody loves Lawyer Malloy, but also because of the Tom Jackson comments and things like that. And then it was about the team coming together and rallying around Bill. And sort of one of those, like, you can't, we can be mad at Bill, but you can't be mad at Bill kind of thing. And then what I realized is the exact same thing that I was doing when I was working with the team to make those scenes come to life, we were going to inevitably be doing in the Spygate episode. And it just felt like you don't need to do everything every single time. And the other part of it that always got to me was, if you get into this trap of, okay, they get to Super Bowl 36, then you have to go to the 2002 season, and then you have to talk about how they didn't make it to the playoffs and discuss why. Was it because people were celebrating too much from the Super Bowl from the year before? Was it this? Was it that? Then you have to go into the Rodney and the lawyer thing, and then you have to go into the AFC Championship game against the Colts, and the competition committee and all these different things. And you could just go and go and go, but then what you find yourself doing is basically just being a person who collects facts, and basically you're just making a glorified timeline, and that's not storytelling. And it was really Scott Pioli's line when he was in the interview chair. He talks about how at the end of that third Super Bowl in 4 years, he was sort of, standing there looking over all of this stuff, and he started to have this thought about the addiction to winning and what you will do. And Teddy also talked about this at great length. And it just felt like it felt like we had covered the thing that made this team so magical and made them come together in 2001. And in a way, we were just sort of saying, we were going through all these other things, not because they were really important to the overall story that we were trying to tell, but more because they happened and they're well known. And that's the worst reason to do something.
I hope you don't think we're nitpicking. It was so good that we're trying to find out when we have you here. But we have you here to find out how the sausage got made, because there was so much of that. Did it strike you? Did it strike the players and the interview subjects that they were going from hero to villain very quickly and becoming reviled and loathed? Was anybody dumbstruck that why are we the bad guys all of a sudden?
I mean, I think they'd lived through it, so they knew. And the first instance I got of it was when I was interviewing Ernie Adams, and we were talking about him on going down to the snow game in '01. And remember, I guess it was episode 2, he says, "This is way before we became the evil empire." And so I remember when he said that, because Ernie was one of the first people I interviewed, it showed me how aware everybody was of how they were viewed. And then you see people like Teddy Bruschi, for example. One of my favorite lines in episode 4 is when he said, "We were the bad guys," and then you sort of see him lean back in his chair and he says, "I kind of liked it though." And there was an embodiment of it. There was an acceptance of it, and they kind of, they wore it as a badge of honor in a lot of ways. And I think that Strahan and I, when we were talking, we started talking about the Christopher Nolan Batman movies, and we were talking about that line in there where one of the characters says, "You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain." And every other franchise in the league at this time, they all died a hero because they didn't make it, and they didn't get past the divisional round or the wild card round, or they didn't even make it into the playoffs. But when you win 3 times in 4 years, people get a little tired of it. And then when all of a sudden they get tired of it, and that leads to you getting caught doing something that, as you guys were talking about earlier, a lot of other people were probably doing, that, people really start to turn on you.
Awesome.
All right, he's Matt Hamachek, director of the Dynasty. Episodes 3 and 4 are out on Apple TV Plus right now. Matthew, thank you so much for being with us. Michael Holley,
hey, thanks,
Tom
guys.
Curran, thank you as well. We'll be right back here next week, Friday, 6 o'clock, to talk episodes 5 and 6. We'll see you then.